Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome back to the workbench for another unboxing. This time I'm taking a look at this, the 1/48 scale Hawker Sea Fury FB.11 from Airfix. So join me as I get stuck inside the box and see what this kit is like. So starting off on the front of the box, we can see we've got two examples of the Australian Sea Furies in flight. I particularly like the look of this dark blue paint scheme. Down the bottom left, we've got an item code of A06105A. So there's presumably a B version somewhere as well. On the long thin edge, we've got some warning information in multiple languages, and then very helpfully, Airfix have given us the tooling date and information. So down here we've got a tooling date of 2017, but I don't actually believe it came into the range in 2017. I think it didn't come in until 2018 in its original release. We have a decal scheme and pack design for this version from 2023. So this is a 2023 range product, and there have undoubtedly been different versions between 2017 and this one. But as of the time I'm making this video, this is the most recent version to the best of my knowledge. We do have some information over here that this features cartograph decals, which are some of the best decals in the world, so they should be to a really good quality. This particular boxing as well, it is indicated that the parts were made in India. Onto the thin edges on the sort of ends, they just feature the same information that we've already seen. So we'll flip over to the other long edge, and this long edge has information about the actual Hawker Sea Fury as well as kit information. So it's 231 millimeters long, 244 millimeters in width, and it features 123 parts. We do have here the three paint schemes which are included in the model, and you can see we've got a Royal Navy version, a potentially civilian-owned one, and also a Sea Fury version from the Royal Australian Navy. We have Humbrol recommended paint colours with the relevant scheme annotated next to them, and this kit features 2 flying hours. So these are coupons, cut them out, keep them. If you're in the club, you can redeem them against more kits. If you're not in the club, do still keep them though and send them to Models for Heroes, who can redeem them for their charitable work. We have a skill level of 2, so Airfix seems to think that this is a slightly more difficult kit than a starter set, but not the most difficult kit in the world. Back of the box doesn't feature anything of note, so let's get this one open and see what we have inside. So the instructions are here. We'll start off with the instructions. To the normal format from Airfix, we have the information about the real Sea Fury at the top, and then a little bit of extra information towards the bottom. On the first page, we have some information about assembly and also the icons which you may see during the build explained to you. And then we start construction of the aircraft. We're going to start, as is quite typical, by doing the cockpit interior. We've got all our paint colours annotated here, and elements are shaded in some colours, and also the previous step is annotated in a sort of orangey colour. We do have some decals as well which need to go onto our control panel. We add that to the previous step, and then we do our seat. We have various elements which need to be glued together. This looks like some sort of bulkhead. This assembles our cockpit, and there is some framework which needs to be glued in as well. Again, little bits of painting instructions are included. We progress on down. We've got some more elements which have been color coded, so the internal landing gear bay for the tail and also the internal wall of the cockpit. And then when we get to this point, it looks like we're installing an additional part for sort of bracing the aircraft and supporting the wings. We can then join our fuselage halves, and we get to this step here where we're going to assemble the landing gear bays. It is indicated to us that if we want to include some of the various drop tanks, and it would appear that for scheme A we need the larger one, but for scheme C we may need the smaller one. There are some holes in here which will need to be drilled out in order to facilitate that. Additionally, there's this component here which looks to me to be like the rudder pedals, but I'm not sure what that is at the moment. Will it show us? I'm sure we can investigate that as we go through. Yeah, there's definitely something here. If this is scheme A has this option. Is it something underneath the aircraft? I'll have a look now. Scheme A, you had an option for something. It is I don't know. What is that? It's this bit here. I'm not sure what that is. It looks almost like a rocket-assisted takeoff part, which is really, you know, it could be that rocket RATO part, which goes onto the bottom of the aircraft. That's interesting. Didn't know about that. Didn't know that the Sea Fury had RATO. But we'll carry on. So that was an option to include on the bottom of the aircraft if you were doing scheme A. The other schemes don't have it. But I mean, if you wanted to include it, why not? It's your model. We move on. We have other elements which need to be glued inside of the bottom of the wing. And then we move on to our engine. So the engine has a number of different parts which need to be glued together. It doesn't look overly complicated, however. And then we move on to the tail surfaces. Tail surfaces look as though they can be positioned in different ways to indicate if the aircraft is, like, I don't know, on the ground and perhaps these are drooping under weight, or perhaps the aircraft is in flight and you want to position it being controlled by a pilot. We do have the option to do extended wings, and these are the steps that we need to follow in order to do that. I probably will go for extended wings because I quite like the aircraft looking like it's ready to go for a fly. We do have the option to install bombs and rockets for Scheme A, and we need to open up holes for that if we're doing so. Ailerons can also be glued in as if they've been operated by the pilot. We then progress on to these steps, which are our steps for having the wings folded if you would like to do so. You can also, again for Scheme A, include your bombs or rockets with the wings folded. And I imagine it would be possible to do one wing folded and one wing extended if you wanted to, as if the ground crew are still in the process of doing that. At this point now, we have an option to raise our landing gear if you'd like to do so. So these parts can be glued into place to simulate the aircraft in flight. What I may do if I have this aircraft on the ground is use these parts as painting masks. They look like they fit perfectly. Moving on down, if you do want to have your landing gear lowered, the parts that are included for that, such as the tail wheel and the main landing gear, are assembled at these points. Having installed all of these various parts for our landing gear, such as the legs and the door covers, we would then have to glue together our wheels and install those as well. And here are some extra images in sort of explaining to you how things should look, just for extra clarity. We then turn over the page and we have our propeller assembly, which is fairly straightforward and then gets glued into the nose. And then this is the sort of rocket assisted thing which helps the aircraft at Scheme A. We do have, I think this is a camera pod as well for Scheme A if you wanted to use it. We have drop tanks for Scheme A, and there's a drop tank for Scheme C, rockets and bombs which can all be assembled and then installed onto the aircraft as appropriate. There is a note down here that if you do decide to do Scheme A, decals 65 need to go onto the wing surfaces first. I imagine that if you put these drop tanks in first, you'll end up with a problem because they won't then fit. So more images here about how all these rockets and things get installed, but personally, if I'm doing Scheme, I think it was C, I won't need to bother with that. We do get to this point though. This looks like the footstep for the pilot to get in. We have an option for lowered to help him climb onto the aircraft, or raised depending on how you've done your aircraft orientation. And then we do have some smaller little vents which can be positioned in a more open or closed version if you want to do so. Landing lights, or navigation lights actually, they go onto the wingtips with the pitot tube, and there is also an arrestor hook as well, which you have the option to have in a more extended position. I think it looks like it just hooks onto that bit, but I imagine that would be the position it's in during flight, and then it would droop down to catch the arrestor hook when it comes in to do a carrier landing. We do have 2 parts for our canopy. You are told what colour to paint the lower side of the where the canopy would be, and this 2-part canopy can then be glued in either a closed position or an open position. And that's it. I did notice that there was no pilot figure, which is a little bit disappointing. So having a raised wheel option on an aircraft is a bit of a no-go for me if there's no pilot to control the plane whilst it's flying. So the first paint scheme we've got here, and they're all printed in full colour, which makes it so much easier to see, is a Royal Navy version, from 1953, and it looks like it's got that sort of rocket assisted pod underneath. You can have a camera pod, you've got RP3 rockets, you've got bombs. This is the one with more options if you were looking for your money's worth. It's got the sky undercolor and then the dark blue upper, and yeah, it looks okay. It looks pretty fun. I am a little bit tempted by this now that I find out it's got all of these options, but I think I've already decided that I want to do the Australian version. We have one which is in civilian ownership by the looks of it, painted in a kind of air racer color, which does look pretty cool. Generally red all over, but not something that I want to do myself. I want to do the blue one. I quite like the look of this one. I don't tend to do very many like foreign nation aircraft. I tend to do a lot of RAF and Royal Navy ones, so I'd like to do one from another country. And to do this one, I've actually already picked up a rattle can for it. So number 15 was the color recommended on the painting instructions, and I already went out and bought one. So my plan for this is to build it up fairly simply, rattle can the whole thing and call it a day. So that's the instructions looked at. Let's see if we can find the decals. Must be near somewhere. They're on the bottom. Oh, we have missed a piece of paperwork actually. To go along with our decals, we've got a stencil placement sheet. So there's going to be some little stencils across all of them. There are some little notes that some of them may only be for certain ones or others, but these just highlight to us where individual stencils should go, because otherwise putting all of this information onto the color paint schemes would make them a bit too cluttered. That's a good inclusion. And then we have our decals. There you go. So that's actually quite a large sheet, but naturally there are 3 different paint schemes on there, and they are all fairly different. At the top we've got our common transfers, and then as we come down we've got the different schemes, the Royal Navy one, the civilian owned one, and then the Australian Navy down the bottom. And these are printed by Cartograph. There is a slight little bit of dirt on there. They look to be really nice. However, mine over here, I don't know if you can quite see it. I wonder if the light will catch it. You see that on this banding, they've kind of got a little bit dented. I think it's because they were at the bottom of the box. So the sprues have been pressing down on them, and there must be something that has impacted it. Not great, but generally, you know, I don't think I'm using them for this paint scheme. I don't need those, so I'm not too fussed about that. But if it was one of the decals I needed, I'd be a little bit annoyed. But other than that, printing is really quite nice. The decal film isn't overly thick. Registration is good. Everything is as central as it should be. Colors are really good, and the text, the small text, you can even make out like the little dials and stuff, and all the little words, which is really good. So there's some of the really highest quality decals that you can get, other than a small little blemish on that from where the sprues have been sitting on it. Because I think if I look, that's the sprues. Flip it over. Oh yeah, it's quite possible that something here, like that there, has been pressing down on it. So here's what it is, I suppose. Let's get this open and have a look. This is actually my first time getting in the bag, so I've just ripped it open. We'll look at the clear parts first, because why not? Why not look at the clear parts first? Just a little sprue here. We have one canopy, one windscreen, a clear part. I think that was for your photo part. And then we have our navigation lights for the wingtips. Plastic on the whole is pretty clear. There's not much in the way of flash, but, and I wonder if anyone can notice this. So on the clear part for the landing, not the landing light, the photography thing, you can see here we've got 2 bubbles, which is unusual. I wouldn't expect to see bubbles in clear parts from Airfix. That's the first time I've experienced that. There does seem to be another bubble just in the clear part here, which is unusual. We see that on the camera. And I don't know if this is another bubble or if it's a scratch. I can't feel it on there. I think that's a bubble. So right there in the center of my canopy is a little bubble, which is unusual. I don't normally see that from Airfix. If I was massively fussed about the quality of these and the fact they've got bubbles in, and I don't think there would be a bubble there in real life, particularly in this one here, I would probably send an email to the spares department and say, hey, look, these are not quite up to the standard I would expect from your molding. Could you send me out a spare one, please? I mean, other than that, the mold quality is pretty good. The canopy frames are not massively proud, but they're proud enough that you could easily quite mask that with a sharp knife. This bubble here is on the canopy framework, so you're not going to notice it once it's painted, but this one being right sort of on the flat part of your photo pod is noticeable, and this one here on the top, it looks like a dent, it looks like a scratch, but it isn't. It's like, actually, you can't feel it. I think that is actually a bubble right in the middle of my canopy. So a little bit disappointing. I have seen better. Personally, I don't know if I've got the capacity to contact Airfix Spares and say to them, look, I need you to replace this part. I may just live with it. But if it was you and you're not happy, definitely either go back through your original retailer and get a replacement, or contact the spares department. So this then brings us on to the parts. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 5 sprues of dark grey plastic. We will take a look at them one by one. Let's just move that out of the way. And then I'll put them back in the box as I've done it, so I know that they're back in the box. So the plastic feels reasonably dense. It's molded in the dark grey plastic that we've come to expect from recent releases from Airfix. It does feel a little bit greasy, so there's some mold release present on these, which may need cleaning up. On this sprue here, which is frame A, conveniently the first one, we have our wing roots, and then wing tips and lower wing surfaces. We also have what appear to be landing gear doors, engine cowlings, and bomb components. The moulding is to a pretty decent quality. There doesn't seem to be a great deal in the way of flash. The details on here consist of recessed and raised as appropriate. Panel lines are maybe a touch thicker than more recent releases from Airfix, but generally pretty acceptable. You can see on here in certain lights the sort of way the mold, the plastic has gone into the mold, sort of the flow marks, but they are flush, so you won't see them in the finished model. Flipping over to the other side, you can see we've got ejector pin marks on the inside surfaces. The plastic, again, it's smooth, but there's slightly weird sheen to it, but you won't notice that once it's been built. We do have some nice little rivet detail on the landing gear doors, which is pretty cool. But yeah, ejector pin marks generally look to be on parts that are not necessarily going to be seen. Let's put that one back in the box and then look at the next one. So this one features, this is frame D. This has smaller parts. So we've got our RP3 rockets here, which come in 2 halves, which need to be glued together, and our rocket assisted takeoff sort of thing. We have, what's this? This looks like the mount for the drop tanks. Other small details, we've got a bulkhead where the chair goes. Here's our chair with some nice sort of leather cushioning on it. We've got our tail wheel and smaller components as well. We've got even like wires and stuff here. So the level of detail is actually pretty decent. It's kind of up to the standard that we would expect from this time period from Airfix. It doesn't quite have the same level of mold quality as we've seen from like 2024, 2023 releases, but it's still pretty good. There is a little bit of flash or a mold seam around some of the parts, which may need a little bit of attention to clear up. The next one to look at is this one. This is frame E for Echo, and we have our 5-bladed prop, which is molded to a good quality. We have some more bombs. These are the internal sort of bits where you would fold your wings, and spinner. That's pretty good. The plastic does feel a little bit greasy whilst I'm holding it, but not massively so. Smaller details here as well, molded to a good quality, but again, the same kind of deal as we looked at previously. Ejector pins are quite cleverly hidden on parts we're not going to see, but there is a little bit of a mold seam, a little bit of flash in a few places. This sprue then, this is frame C, and this has landing gear doors. It has like our ailerons, it has our drop tanks, our two different variants, large and small, and also the photographic one, which is this one here because it's got no sort of front to it. More landing gear doors, so these are the closed ones I think, and these are the open ones. As we move through, we've got our wheels. So the wheels have actually got a softened side to them, which would simulate the aircraft resting and the weight pushing down on it. And they look to be molded to a pretty good quality. We've got a nice tread on there. However, as they come in two halves, I wonder how visible the seam will be. What I do quite like is the sort of rivet details on the bulkhead here, and also the control panel has some nice subtle details as well. Into the landing gear bay, we have some rivet details and wiring and things, which should look quite nice when it's built up. And then we move on to the final bit, which is our sort of internal cockpit bathtubby type bit, which has got some little dials and things as well. Same sort of deal, a little bit of a mold seam in a few places, a little bit of flash here and there, but generally pretty nice. And that brings us on to the final sprue, which has our fuselage halves, our engine components. Not a great deal to look at in the engine wise. Being a radial engine with a massive cowling and propeller in the way, you're not going to see a great deal. But the details on here, again, pretty decent. We have a little bit, I don't think that is a scuff. I think it's just where the mold has gone. The plastic has flown into the mold. It feels smooth. We have some subtle rivet details in a few places. Panel lines are, as to be expected from this sort of era, a little bit chunky, but generally pretty okay. The tail surface components have some raised rivet details on, and so too do these. I think they're the elevators. These components here, I think that's the rudder, a few little raised details on there, raised rivets on those ones rather than recessed. And then the last bit there, again, I think that's the other side of the tail surface. We had our sort of support strut for in the center to help hold the wings in place, and on the inside it's the same sort of deal. Ejector pin marks are not on visible surfaces, but yeah, actually a pretty nice looking kit. So I'm not going to go back through all the sprues. I'm pretty happy with the plastic parts from what I've seen here. They look to be molded to a pretty good quality. There is a few little bits that are going to need a little bit of attention, but I have heard good things about this kit. I have heard that it's fairly decent to build up. My only concern, of course, is with the bubbling on the clear parts, which if you were really worried about, if I was really worried about, I'd be contacting Airfix for a replacement, because you don't want to see bubbles on your canopies. However, I don't really think I could be bothered, so I'll probably just build it as is with those in there. Decals, again, really nice looking, but the way that they were put in the bottom of the box has resulted in this getting a little bit of a dent, but I'm not using that decal, so not too fussed. I'll just put them on the top. A stencil map, which is handy to see, and our instructions, which were printed in full colour and easy to follow. As we discovered as we went through, no pilot figure. I know that Airfix have included pilot figures with their 1/48 scale kits because they did one in their Tomahawk. I don't know if you could reuse that one, because it being a sort of Air Force pilot and a Navy pilot, perhaps they had different equipment, especially as this is, a much later aircraft than the Tomahawk was. So disappointed that there is a raised landing gear in-flight option, but there's no pilot to fly the plane. I think that would be my main gripe there. All of which comes within this lovely illustrated box. I really like the look of this. This is part of the reason why I got it, because I want to replicate the blue version that you can see here. So as we discussed, the tooling age of this is 2017, but I don't think it was released until 2018, but it's been released, I think, in 3 boxings since then. and they have had different paint schemes and things inside there. So there's a few variants out there depending on what you wanted to get. If you were looking at buying this, how much would you be parting with? And at the time I'm making this video, this is retailing RRP in the UK for £34.99. So let's just call that shy of 35, which yeah, it's okay, isn't it? It's a 1/48 scale kit. It's not going to be the smallest in the world. We've got quite a lot of parts. We have 3 decal schemes, and they come with cartograph decals, which are really, really nice. The only issue I have is with those clear parts not being quite up to par, but I'm sure if I contacted Airfix, they'd get me a spare part if I needed one. Maybe £35 is a little bit expensive, but as you can see on the screen, I actually got this for £20.99 when it was on sale as part of the 2024 Black Friday sales. So actually for well, let's call it £21, absolute bargain. But that's almost £15 off of the RRP. It's nearly half price, isn't it? So if they can sell it for this cheap, it's definitely worth keeping an eye out to see if it will come down to that sort of price again. But I anticipate that it was at that price because it was stock clearance. It is possible that they may consider releasing this again in the future with different paint schemes, or perhaps reverting to a previous version with other paint schemes before that we had seen previously. Personally, I'm looking forward to having a go at this. I don't want to go too heavy or too hard with this one, like I've shown you. I've got that rattle can. I'm just going to spray the whole thing in its sort of blue color and call it a day from there. I think it will build up into a nice model, but there are a few little bits and pieces I've seen which I'm not entirely happy with. And with that, I think I'm going to leave this unboxing here. Please let me know down in the comments what you think of my review and if you think my assessment of this kit was fair. Also, have you built this one and how did your build of this model go? As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. A massive thanks to these guys on screen. If you'd like to join them or support the channel in other ways, full information is below the video. The best way to support the channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.